So, backed by popular demand is the Women Visionaries panel. Each year, we identify women from the corporate, not-for-profit, or federal public sector who inspire us, who educate us by sharing information about their personal and professional journeys. This year is no exception. I look forward to meeting them, and to introduce them and to moderate the panel is Miriam Tesnes-Abbasi from DTSC.
Okay, I'm just going to bring it a little bit closer. Good afternoon, everyone. It is an absolute honor and pleasure and privilege to be sharing the stage with these amazing women today. We thought we'd start out doing things a little bit differently. Rather than me introduce everyone, we're just going to jump straight into questions and have each one of the panelists introduce themselves. Through this question, can each one of you start by sharing your current roles and talk to what led you to where you are today? Let's start in the middle. Yes. Yes, the question is, can you share your current role, like where you are today, and what led you to the place that you've achieved?
So I'm Meredith Williams. I'm the director, at least for another week or so, of the California Department of Toxic Substances Control. And what led me to the role was a very circuitous route, but from chemical companies to the semiconductor industry to natural resources, an aquatic, a nonprofit that does work for science and support of policy for aquatic resources. And somewhere along the way, I got connected to people who worked in green chemistry, including Debbie Raffel, who many of you may know as a former director of the department, and she brought me into the department, and I've been there for nearly 11 years.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's a really interesting story, because I think there's not a lot of little girls who grow up to say, one day I want to be the director of DTSC, right? I hope there will be more now, but thank you for sharing your journey. How about we go to Cheree next?
Cheree, hello. I'm Cheree Peterson. I'm the Deputy Regional Administrator for EPA Region 9, which is the Pacific Southwest. Thank you for the shout out. California, Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, and the Pacific. We have some Pacific Territories people here, so excited about that. So I have only been at EPA for 18 months, but I do have a long government career as well as some nonprofit career. But I would say where I am now was exactly where I started. In college, I was at UC Santa Barbara, and I was an environmental studies major. And at the time, they were trying to kill the program because it wasn't bringing in enough money. And now, of course, it's setting the standard for the country. But I did have a circuitous route. I got lured in by what appeared to me as a young woman, the glamour of DC. I think that has been shed a little bit in recent years, and spent some time in the executive office of the president, spent some time on the Hill, and really wanted to get things done. It's hard sometimes in government at the DC level to get things done. And I'm like, you know what, I want to really make things happen. So I bounced around with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and then we moved back. I grew up in California, moved back to California, and was much better able to see things happen on the ground. Now, I was with the Corps of Engineers, so sometimes it's large infrastructure is very slow on the ground. But coming to EPA, I feel like not only have I come full circle for my academics, where I began, but also I've always wanted to make things happen, and EPA makes things happen faster than any other federal agency, and that's because of all of our partners, like all of you. So thank you.
Hello, everybody. Debra Gore. I'm the president and CEO of the Greenlining Institute. So we're a think tank. I like to say that a lot more tank than think. We come rolling in with community voice and collaboration and coalition. So think of us that way. We sit at the intersection of economic equity and environmental and climate equity. So there's a unique positionality we have there. So what brought me to this position, sort of a varied background as well. I sort of was good with math in high school and became an engineer. And then from there, went to graduate school, and I did some investment banking, and then I took my engineering and my banking background and did some global project finance. Then I jumped over into sort of the academy space and worked on some university campuses, both public and private institutions, and then got involved in San Francisco politics, so WRFL and SFE, and I was working at the San Francisco Conservation Corps. I was leading that effort, which got me right into politics, and you've not done politics till you've done San Francisco politics. And so that you know, led me to the Greenlining Institute, which sort of was this amalgamation of doing policy work and doing community work, and we have a leadership academy, which is intergenerational work, and so that led me to where I am now, and we can talk about that journey more with the panel.
Well, that's wonderful. I think it's an example of how oftentimes career paths are not linear. You know, it really is a journey, and you have to have a certain amount of fluidity to take advantage of opportunities that come your way, and I see that in all three of you, so that is actually quite interesting. You know, what I'm also feeling is that there's a lot of intersectionality of science and policy and politics in all of your work. I wonder, Debra, if you can speak to that a little bit more and maybe talk about what part of that do you enjoy more than the other?
Enjoy more? So, okay, so what I would say is, and I was talking to my mom before she passed, is like, I like to do hard things. It's just something like I'm gravitated towards hard things. And so if you look at the work, you know, everybody is trying to do here, it is inherently hard. It is inherently, like, there's a challenge there. There's a learning curve that y'all are on. There's a desire to make it better. Like, it's just kind of woven within the room. And if you hear it, you know, through what people are trying to do, it is hard. And so fundamentally, you know, if you're trying to do policy, for Greenlining, if we're doing it right, we're listening to community, we're seeing these problems, and we're saying, but there are structural problems. There's some systems. You know, Leah, and I know Leah's father, Richard, and you know, we meet and we talk about these structural problems, and he's so candid and forthright about, you know, what are the things we're working on. And so I think about the policy work being seated in the place-based work, and the place-based work can only happen if you're doing the policy work. So, but I'd be interested in seeing what you all think of that sort of juxtaposition.
I'm finding out that Debra and I have more in common than I realized. And I gave, as you may remember, I gave a talk on intersectionality at this conference a few years ago and talked about the intersection. And I may have said this at the time, which is, when I did physics work, I always said that everything fun happens at the messy interfaces. And so when I worked in semiconductor, it was about what was happening at the nanoscale between the layers of of a semiconductor, things like that. And I still think that's true. And because when I moved over to the San Francisco Estuary Institute, it was all about, you know, estuarine processes where the fresh water was meeting the salt water. And so I do love the intersectional space. I will say I love to geek out, so the science is, I have a favorite among those three. I do like the science an awful lot and enjoy, I mean, that's one of the things I've enjoyed about DTSC is just, I know enough to be dangerous, you know, and a mile wide and an inch deep on everything from toxicology to geology to you name it, so.
Thank you. I think what I've seen, having worked most of my career at the federal government, is that when you get a lot of that intersectionality, the immediate answer is no. No, that's too hard. No, we can't. You know, we would like to, but we can't. But there's a lot of people at EPA and other federal agencies as well that are like, well, we have these new policies that are, you know, like Justice 40, but the regulations that underpin our decisions don't allow us to do this. So it gives us an opportunity to find that sort of wiggle room of where we can do things and how we can say yes. And sometimes we hit a wall, and it's very frustrating when we hit a wall, but usually we try to find a way around it. Like there's, yes, maybe under this policy, there's a no, I'm sorry, we can't do that, but maybe in a different program, there's a different way to approach it because it's a different perspective. You're not really changing the problem, maybe you're changing the perspective of how it's seen because you're looking at it through a different lens. So it's sometimes tough because I think if you get as far as I think these ladies with me have gotten, you're only working on hard problems. No one brings you an easy, oh, here, nobody else could solve this. Can you solve it? I'm like, oh, yeah, sure, this is easy. The answer is yes. You're getting the problems that are, everyone has, the smartest people in your agency and your group have put their heads together and they can't figure it out. So how can we look at this differently? And it's a challenge, and sometimes a huge challenge, as well as in education. But to me, that point, even though the easy out is no, it does give you a chance to look at different perspectives and maybe get to a yes or to a maybe, or not this way, but that way.
So each one of you in your responses touched a little bit upon the challenges of the positions that you're in and the challenges that you face. Can you talk a little bit about how you overcome these challenges and whether some of the reframing that you mentioned is the way to do it? I'd be interested in hearing about that.
Sure. One thing I've learned, and certainly our regional administrator, Martha Guzman, always reinforces, is never take no as the final answer. You don't have to do that. There might be a possible or a yes, or maybe it's a completely different program, and of course we are a rule of law country, so sometimes the law just needs to be changed. Now, EPA doesn't lobby, and I'm not lobbying for changing of any laws right now. But when it becomes obvious, I think others, the partners take up that mantle that if our hands are tied, we can be educators together about how we go about this. But I think reframing, always pushing hard, and there's that, I'm sure we've all faced that, where you're pushing so hard and all of a sudden you're like, ooh, this is not gonna go well if I continue to push. So what's another avenue I can take? Because that's a very important skill, I think, as you go forward in your career. Pushing. You make too many enemies pushing, then the doors will never open. Because people are just mad at you personally and your style. Which is, we've all gone there. I've made people mad, certainly, in my career. But how far do I push till I'm like, I need to find another avenue because these people are partners and decision makers that I'm going to need in the future.
Would you like to respond to that?
I can go, well, I will only say my father's favorite book was The Art of Possibility, and he would give a copy to everybody that he saw. And I do think that one benefit of having a varied career is you don't know what all the rules are in the different sectors when you enter them. So I know that when I entered public service, I didn't know what we weren't supposed to do. And so that allowed me to help the organization, I hope, understand that we don't always have to look at things the way we've always looked at them. And I do think that having as many perspectives as you can helps you understand problems better and therefore get to better solutions.
Absolutely, thank you. Debra, did you want to weigh on that?
Overcoming challenges is, it's sort of, if you're, I think, a woman in leadership, that's all you've done. Yeah. You weren't supposed to be there, and I mean, you did something right along the way, and I would put some perseverance, hard work, et cetera. So I do agree, it's like looking at things a little bit differently. It's a challenge in front of you, like people are saying no, or it can't be done, and you're sort of like, like maybe, let me tip that a different way, let me look at it, let me get some different perspectives on it. So I think that the overcoming part is the part that I'm struggling with a little bit, because it's sometimes you don't have to go through it. You can go around it, you can go over it, you can go under it, right? So I think it's a matter of how you navigate what that challenge looks like in front of you.
Thank you. I mean, it does make sense, right? Like if you can get around the problem and still move forward, sometimes that's the path of least resistance. I appreciate that. Switching subjects a little bit, another question we had on our list is, as women leaders in the environmental and social justice sectors, what were some of the defining moments in your careers that shaped your leadership philosophy as it stands today? Maybe we can start with Cheree.
Thank you, as long as you're not starting with me because I'm the oldest. That's okay. I think there were there was lots of defining moments when you get to this point in your career, but I can think of two. One in particular, there was a flood control project this was when I was with the Army Corps of Engineers, and it was in Winslow, Arizona. I mean, everybody thinks of the Eagle song. They don't think that they have actually a lot of underprivileged people that get flooded almost every year, every other year, because they lack a flood control or flood reduction project. And it would never pencil out because the community the buildings weren't worth that much. And I'd worked on this for we finally got it so it was better. We could do something at the Corps of Engineers. We could never find any money. And, that sat with me for a couple of years. Is like, that means that only the wealthy counties are getting protection. And in Flagstaff, Arizona, similar situation. The founding fathers of Flagstaff, Arizona, when they built their flood damage reduction system, they built it so it would flood the African-American section of town. That's just how they built it, back into people's yards. And that project wasn't penciling out either. It's just some of this history that you learn. But I'm like, okay, I am now in the senior executive position at the Army Corps of Engineers. If I can't make this happen, it's probably never going to happen because it will get old and stale and people will forget. And then we had a lot of the infrastructure money that came through the Biden-Harris administration, and it was finally, you didn't have to follow the rules to get things funded. You could look at environmental justice. You could look at underprivileged communities, regardless of what their buildings were actually worth. And that was one of the last things I did before I went over to EPA, is we went out and visited those communities, and it was so, to actually finally see some fruit from that was really pivotal for me. And then I would say one of the pivotal points was a mentor I had. He was my boss, and if someone asked you to describe a Philly Italian down to like the gold chain, that was this guy. Like, that's exactly who he was, and still is to this day. I love him to death. But he was really the first boss I had who, if you were doing the best that you can and getting results and working at things differently, he was in your corner and he was looking out ahead and saying, okay, if you want to get promoted, you need to do these other two things that you didn't really want to do, but you need to do them. And you need to make your resume look like this. And he was very, since he was almost at retirement age, he'd been through all of that. He knew at the sort of Department of Defense level where I was what they were looking for. And if it really wasn't for him and his encouragement and his foresight, I probably wouldn't have gone into the senior executive service, because I would have been like, there's not very many women there or people of color. I don't know why I would want to be there. But, by him investing in me and sort of opening my eyes, those sort of two things were pivotal. There's lots of other things that were pivotal, but those, when I saw the question, those were the one person, shout out to Joe Calcara out in New Jersey, that's where he lives now, and then these two projects in Flagstaff, Arizona, and Winslow, Arizona.
Thanks. Yeah, you're reminding me of a couple of people. When I made the leap from semiconductor to environmental work, there were a couple people, Felicia Marcus amongst them, who actually had the imagination to see that there were transferable skills and gave me opportunity. Mike Connor at SFEI was another one. And first of all, opportunity is just tremendous, especially when you're a younger woman. If people aren't giving you that opportunity, it's hard to come by. And then when I was at San Francisco Estuary Institute, there came a point where the staff really recognized the need for some change. And that was, basically it was everybody shoving me to the front and saying, here, talk for us. And that, it caught me off guard, and up until that point, I think I had thought of myself as, a good manager or a good project manager or a good number two or whatever it was. And that was the moment when I went, oh, this is different. This is, this is leadership. And so, that certainly was a moment where I started to see myself differently in those kinds of roles. And then I think in terms of DTSC, I have to give my shout out to Miss Margaret from West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. There's a book called Fierce Conversations. I often recommend it to people, and in some ways it really should be called Fierce Listening, because in order to have a real conversation with somebody, you got to shut up, get out of the way, and make sure they're really heard. And I remember having this sense the first time I had a one-on-one with Miss Margaret to keep my mouth shut and listen. And that changed my understanding of, she went through all the decades and all the different issues and all that it took for her to be where she was. And it just changed how I thought about leadership when it comes to environmental justice issues. And so, but listening is a universal skill that I strongly encourage.
Okay, so Miss Margaret, if you opened your mouth, she's going to tell you about yourself. So I was like really smart to sort of say, let me just hear the wisdom of the room. Okay, so I'm going to give you two sort of really pivotal. I mentioned that I left Wall Street, but I was an engineer, so I went to work for Bechtel Corporation. So I think we have a lot of engineers, right? But inside Bechtel, there's a boutique investment bank where Bechtel not only builds the infrastructure, but they take an equity position, so they sort of buy companies, right? So we did all this public-private partnership, but they were taking a chunk of the action. So we would go do big multimodal infrastructure projects, mostly overseas, so I got a passport, got to work at all these places. And in some of the places, there was a lot of corruption. And we had clearly put in about $4 to $5 million of pre-development money on a project, and I won't name the city or the country, and they were looking for payola, a payment, a pay-to-play. And I was like, dang, I just put in 18 months, are we gonna pay? Is Bechtel gonna put up the money, and are we gonna sort of grease the government to get where we needed to get? And they said no. We were not going to do anything corrupt, and we're gonna walk away from this work, and we're gonna walk away from this money. Put in me values, like where are my values? And am I going to compromise that for some project that could have been billions of dollars of projects? Okay, so that was just pivotal, impactful. The second, so I played basketball in college, and so I moonlighted in doing some college broadcasting. So I was doing college football sideline stuff and basketball before it really took off. So I'm doing this side gig, and I'm looking to leave now Bechtel. Got married, had a kid, I couldn't be traveling so much. So I'm going on sort of just random, and this is, keep your friends and people who know you. I talk about, have an advisory council, your own kitchen cabinet that you can go to, right? So I'm like, just put it out there. I just want to work in the United States. That's it. I didn't have any other requisite. I just want to work in the United States. I'd had a passport and, been all over the world. And so this opportunity came up, where going back to my alma mater, which is Stanford, and the athletic department was looking for this CFO. And they wanted somebody who had commercial market business, but also new sports. So I'm like, sure, I'll consider it. So I go to this panel interview. I kid you not. Here's the panel. The provost was some person named Condoleezza Rice. The athletic director was Ted Leland, who was the top 3 athletic directors in the country, and the athletic rep, so the NCAA has a designation called the faculty athletic rep, was Cheree, who was the top Latino professor in the country. So I interview with these 3 people, and I'm sort of like, yeah, I'm taking this job, right? Where else would I be able to learn from a Black woman, a Latino male, and a white male who would mentor and guide me? So I made this hard pivot into college athletics, became, the CFO of the Stanford Athletic Department, and it presented into itself. So now I'm negotiating college contract, TV contracts, lease agreements, were things that I was already doing, but in a different industry. So for me, those two big moments were about the people and about my values. And then the last thing I'll leave you with, not the last, on this point, for me, the way this work that I'm doing now, or the work we are doing now, is there's a saying that goes, decades go by where nothing happens, and then weeks go by where decades happen. Wow. Right now, listen, right now, the EPA funding, the private sector funding, what's happening with both, community, we are in weeks where decades of work has happened, and now we're moving forward very quickly. But there are decades of people before us who did that so that we could move fast in the few weeks. And so that my moments in my life where I'm just like, oh, I've felt these pivots before, and I stood in it and said, okay, I'm going to pivot. Right? And sort of the same thing. We're in some moments right now. We have some alignment with movement and funding and policy that's sort of saying, okay, what y'all gonna do? And so I just share that with you in terms of my journey and how I reflect on where I am now.
And that's a really important reflection, because it reminds us all that nothing happens because of what happens in this moment. It's because of the investment in time and people and everything that's happened before us. And it's everything coming together at the right place, the right time, either on a micro or macro scale, right? And that's how we end up where we end up. So shifting the conversation a little bit, all three of you talked about important mentors that you had that were very pivotal in framing your journey and your trajectories. I'd like to hear, maybe we can go to Meredith first on this. What have you done in terms of uplifting and mentoring younger people, women, to help with their own journeys, and how have you seen that interaction?
I've had a number of formal, where people have come and said, will you be my mentor, in the formal process, and we set up regular meetings, and really, yeah, you'd be surprised. People don't ask as often as they should for people to be their mentors. And so, if you're a young woman, just ask somebody. People are very generous with their time. So on that front, that's a more formal way. But I would say a lot of time, what I've tried to do is make sure that talented people see how talented they are. And this is, we've all heard of imposter syndrome. If you're a woman, you may be more vulnerable to it. If you're an African-American woman, you may be more vulnerable to it. You got to take up your space in the room, and it's a process to learn how to do that. And so while people are going through that and getting to that place where they understand that, oh, I absolutely deserve a seat at this table, it's important to reflect back. I saw that. I saw how you navigated that tough issue. I saw the quality of your work. I see you, and reflect that back. And so I would say that's one thing that I've tried to do, is just a lot of cheerleading, but it's not really cheerleading, because it's just based on what I'm seeing and just making sure that they see it.
And that really is an important point, I think, especially for young people, young women, this the concept of imposter syndrome and not feeling like they belong, and take the time to make them feel like they belong is really important, and I think contributes to their confidence, and then confidence leads to good work. Yeah. And it grows from there. Cheree?
Can I
Yes.
just pile
Please.
on a little bit?
Yes.
So my undergrad was Ivy League. I went to Yale, and the message I got day in and day out was, you don't belong. People would come and sit next to me at a dinner at the freshman commons and basically ask, why did they let you in? Nobody ever asked my AP scores or my SAT scores. They asked, do you play a sport? Do you do these things? And then when they got to the fact that, oh, you play clarinet and you're in the orchestra, they'd stop asking questions. And I internalized a lot of that. And then I took some time, I did some work, and I ended up at North Carolina State University for my grad school. And the second I walked on that campus and there were African American students doing amazing things, my world opened up. So, you know, we were talking about representation and how much it matters. But honestly, that experience on that campus with, you know, a person who has become, you know, he was this incredible mechanical engineer who ended up being president of George Mason University, and I could go on and on about how talented these people were. It made such a difference to me.
Thank you for sharing that. Cheree?
Sure, thank you for the question. I think a couple of different things. One, I've made sure when I'm mentoring people that I'm mentoring a wide variety of people. I think when I was much younger, I looked around, well, significantly younger, and I'm like, oh, I'm only mentoring women, and I'm only mentoring women that look like me. That's not right. And I hadn't set out to do that. And I'm like, I need to be more conscious of that, because especially where I was working at the time, if I wasn't conscious of that, probably nobody else was going to be conscious of that, because it just wasn't a place that thought about, had that value. So it made me not wait for people to come ask me. I mean, some people did, but to be very specific and like, hey, can I help you with that? Or being intentionally generous with support and comments. And this is, you know, you did this great, you should do more of this. Have you thought of this training or this class? And doing it in a more widespread manner. And I was, at the time, one of the only senior women. For a while, I was the only senior woman in the Corps of Engineers. Now there are many more, but that I need to be intentional with what I was doing. The other thing, I actually learned in a class and found it to be true. It was a Stanford class that I took for fun, because I didn't go to an Ivy League school. They've done studies on how power transfers between people, especially people sort of different ages. And if you talk to a powerful person, even for just 15 minutes, and it goes well, while they don't consciously do this, they are unconsciously all of a sudden invested in your advancement. And it doesn't have to be, hey, can I be your mentor? It's like, hey, what you did in that meeting was really great. Can I take 15 minutes? Everyone will give you 15 minutes. They might not want to be your mentor, but they'll give you 15 minutes. And then you're in their space. So when they think of opportunities, or they think of, maybe I should ask this person, or maybe you ask again, they're more likely to do it. And there's actually been sociological studies done, and it's as small as 15 minutes. You don't have to be in a formal mentorship, which sometimes is harder, you're intimidated, but 15 minutes, I can always find 15 minutes. I'm sure probably everyone in this room can find 15 minutes.
And so, Debra, I'm going to ask you.
Wait, can I just?
Yes, absolutely,
Okay.
yes.
So as I will do, I'm going to flip this. There are times when people are mentoring you to other people. So this is where you're getting recommended. So if I've worked with you and I have been impressed with you, I might recommend you, right? Meredith's like, I'm looking for somebody and I'm like, ooh, go find this person to go. So, and that is mentoring. Somebody is putting you up for an opportunity. And it still happens to me. So I come to Greenlining, I've been there, a year? And Mary Daly's office, she's the president of the Federal Reserve of San Francisco Bank, and their office called me to serve on their Community Advisory Council. Somebody put my name to them, right? For the work that I had done before, and now I was in a position at Greenlining to be able to serve. People are doing that mentoring for you. People are, so I always say, so put your best work forward. Find your voice in how you're doing that work. And then you sort of like, oh, I got lucky. And I was like, somebody probably recommended you, or somebody spoke really well of your work. So mentoring is like also behind the scenes. And that the evaluation assessment of what you're doing also is behind the scenes. And I think that's a form that, that you may not think of as mentoring, but that I'm very conscientious about. And that, and that I let people know, look, I see your work, I think it's fabulous, and mind if I recommend you to stuff.
And that is really important. I mean, mentoring is not sitting down with somebody and telling them what to do next. It's so much bigger than that, and I thank you for reflecting on it. The question I was about to ask you actually was, based on something Meredith mentioned, is the relationship between, mentoring and uplifting, and how that interplays with the concept of inclusion and belonging. Because those are really important concepts. I think it's so easy for DEIB to become just part of the narrative, part of a box that needs to be checked. But for someone like me, as I feel for everyone on this stage, it means something, because there was a time where it was very hard to get. And I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to that in context of mentoring and making people feel like they belong in the spaces that they are at or the spaces that they aspire to be in.
So, we were talking earlier that the mic drop moment was, when they come into the room, maybe you can share, that if she is the only woman of color, then she leaves. So I'm just the opposite of that. Like, if I'm the only, I feel like I need to stay, and that I'm gonna be comfortable. Because if I'm comfortable, then that means I'm supposed to be there. And then you have to really kind of get comfortable too. And so if I'm all stressed and anxious, I think you're gonna feel stressed and anxious, right? So I really approach it as like, inclusion is that you come into the room and you feel comfortable, right? And that if you can do that, then others can do that. And then you have to work on it. I'm not saying it's some magical thing, that you're in a situation where it might be a little awkward, then just say, gosh, this is a little awkward. It's like, sometimes I'm like, am I the only one again? And people are kind of like, oh, she spoke it out loud. But then it's like, but then we have a little giggle, just like this, right? Y'all just kind of, But it's like, okay. But it's okay because I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable. Let's talk. What's the problem? What's the challenge? How am I looking at it? How are you looking at it? And then now it's like, inclusivity from that perspective. But I do think there are also, there's just a practical, actionable way you have to do it too. I think you have to hire folks that think differently, from different communities, from different walks of life, from, that just because that's gonna make your work better, it's gonna make your team stronger.
So one of the reasons I left Silicon Valley was because I was very incongruous. Like, the values of the company I was working for, the values of that whole sector were not aligned with my values, and I had to resolve that. Like, it was a crisis, and so I had to get someplace where I was aligned. And in the course of that, I just settled into being myself more, and showing up as myself more, and what I didn't realize until very recently is then that just becomes a way of being and a way of working. So a couple people on my team have been commenting on just the fact that there's room for them to be either their goofy self or their anxious self or their quiet self or whatever it is. And I'm very proud of that they feel as though there's been room for people to be across all of those dimensions. One of the other things we were talking about is, you were just talking about, decades happening now. And so there's so much happening in terms of the brownfield space and moving forward environmental justice, and we were speculating, like, is it gonna stick? Is it gonna move? Is it gonna really become institutionalized? And my thoughts about DEIB are, they ain't sticking, right? We had a George Floyd moment, and companies and universities are dialing back on their DEIB programs. So we have to be vigilant on a number of levels. We have to be vigilant in terms of the resources that we invest in it. We have to be vigilant against our own biases, which I'm finding them all the time, and really have to have conversations with myself about them and be very honest and deal with them. But, and I'm just gonna challenge, this cannot be done just by the people of color. White folks have to show up and they have to be part of the conversation, and they have to commit to it. And that's all, that's really uncomfortable. But I have tremendous fear for whether or not we are going to continue to make progress in diversity and equity, inclusion, belonging. We're in California, which is a bubble. We're working in state government, which is a bubble in some of us. And so, outside of those bubbles, there are definite pushes to get things moving back to where they were.
Yeah, I think it came of when I first became, so senior executive is a specific category in government, which is why I've said it a couple of times. But when I first became a senior executive, and I went to a meeting at headquarters, it was sort of all the programmatic senior executives, and it was like a very small room. It was like one of those, if you ever, I know this sounds ridiculous, but have you ever seen that Attack of the Killer Tomatoes movie, and they all like squish into that tiny little conference room? That's what it was like. And I looked around, and I'm like, I'm the only woman here. I was kind of shocked. And then I looked around, and there was only 3 men of color. And I was like, wow, this is, and they were all good people. I'm like, but there's a lot of work to do. And if I don't do it, there's probably nobody else sitting at this table who's going to do it. Because it's not, it was a different organization than what I'm in right now. But if I didn't, then it would be another person that whoever came behind me would have to fight kind of the same fight. So that I needed to, find that kitchen cabinet or, this group. As I became more senior and got to know more people, like, who wants to do something about it? Because some people do, and maybe they were afraid or they felt like, because they've had, at the time, there were some white men colleagues who were like, I don't want to speak up because I don't want to say wrong, but I really support you, like, what do I do? Getting those folks around too, to sort of speak to everyone else that, I'm just not out here, crazy Cheree, you've said your thing on diversity, now go sit down, because that certainly had happened before, but, getting other people who were in whatever the mainstream was to speak up, because they would be listened to. And now, of course, I want to own my seat and own what I do, but sometimes it needs more than one voice. And so to find the allies that people listen to, and it got easier and easier, and it became more diversified where I was there slowly, and it's got a long way to go. But I have to, kind of own that seat at the table so that it looks different the next time there's an open seat.
I think that is incredibly important. One of the things, Dr. Williams, years ago in 2020, when you had done like an open forum and said some words to us in light of what had happened with the George Floyd situation, was let's get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think for women in your position, that actually is really important, because that's the way you're opening doors and opening pathways and making it a little bit easier for the next person coming through. And some of, what I've told my daughters is that you're not always going to be invited into the spaces you'd like to be in, but your confidence is your invitation. That's what's going to take you through. I think it goes to something each one of you have said, that there's a little bit of a push and a drive that you have to make for yourself. And sometimes in that space where you're the only woman, you might be met with neutrality, and that's comfortable to go in. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult, and we have to deal with those all the time, and that's a constant battle. But it makes the thing that isn't is, right? And I think that's what we're all trying to do. So, shifting a little bit more specifically, pardon? I'll get to questions. Okay. Did I just ignore all of your flashcards? Sorry. I'm so sorry. I was just having so much fun. You can just, everybody knows you're whispering. Just tell me. Oh, okay, good. Yes. Okay, so let's go to what advice would you give to young women entering the environmental and policy fields today, particularly those from marginalized communities, and how can they overcome the systemic barriers that we have all experienced? Let's go with Cheree.
Start with me. So first, find your people that are north, south, east, and west. And what I mean by that is the person above you who's going to mentor you, your east and west, sort of cadre, who's going to help you break through those barriers together. It's very hard to do it by yourself. And then how are you going to sort of uplift the people below you who are just starting, whether they're just new to this particular career or they're younger folks? You need to sort of think of it full circle. And I think I just said it in the last question is, take your seat at the table. Even if there's seats open along the wall, always take the seat at the table. Always take the seat at the table and always speak up. If they don't like what you have to say, I guarantee they'll pass over you. But they also might listen, and they also might change what they're doing.
What I would offer is pretty redundant with what we've said, but the classic networking, you just put a nice framing on networking of how to do it in maybe a more systematic way to make sure you have all your bases covered. But I do think that finding people who will mention your name to somebody else or connect you to some other opportunity is tremendously important. And then, there is still the fake it till you make it. There's going to be moments when you're not sure you're up for it. Just fake it, right? See where it takes you, because it could be imposter syndrome again that's making you think that you have to fake it when in fact you're not really faking it. You actually have what you need and you have something to offer.
Thank you.
Advice, find your voice. I think one of the most compelling things is if you know your voice, like you got to use your voice. That takes some development. I would challenge, especially women or people of color, if they're in a senior executive position, they're going to have very strong communication skills, just flat out. Just because you have to be centered in your voice, and you have to have used your voice. You have to have practiced it, and then you hone it, right? So, find your voice, whatever that means. And then I agree that no matter where you are, bring somebody up, right? It's lift while you're rising. So if you've just finished undergrad, you better be reaching out to your undergrad. If you just finished the C-suite, you better bring it. That to me, the biggest, regardless of, gender or ethnicity or race, there should be some succession planning. Like there was a standing ovation for Meredith yesterday, and I thought the most compelling thing was that team she left behind. She's like, this person, they're ready. And I was like, we're in good hands. Like, right? And I was like, that's some advice, right? That she prepared people while she was doing the job. And she can leave, and the job is in good hands, right? So I don't care where you are in your career, you should be doing that. So your voice, and then pulling the ladder and bringing the ladder, and then doing some kind of planning within your community or within the job you're doing is what I'd leave you with.
Thank you. I mean, I literally could spend the entire day with you, but let's see, are there any questions from the audience for this wonderful panel? Do you want to go up to the mic?
I don't even see. Oh, I do see it. Uh-oh, I left my notes behind. I took a whole page full of notes because that was all wonderful. Thank you so much for all the input today. I guess what I wanted to ask, and I think this is going to go to Cheree. You had sort of talked about not taking no for an answer, and I do think there's a time that you sort of have to push back a little bit and read the room and go around and that kind of stuff. But I guess I would ask you, when it comes to getting hit with a stereotype that maybe you're being a bossy woman when you're going through that, how do you debunk that and turn that story around?
In some cases, you just let it ride. I mean, if someone's going to think I'm bossy, well, okay. My 16-year-old son thinks I'm an idiot, so. There you go. But so what I have used when I was in a very male-dominated organization, and it sounds very feminine, but it was charm and humor. You know, you got to be careful with that because you don't want to be the, you know, nice girl on the corner. But often when you're alone in the room, it's the way to get people together because maybe they're drawn in a little by your humor or your charm, and then you kind of hit them with the hard-hitting facts because it doesn't cost you anything to be friendly. You know, I'm not talking like I'm flirting with these people. I'm talking about, oh, you know, what's your life like? You know, not just your work life. Oh, you have a really sick daughter? Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. Tell me, you know, that's okay. And that sometimes categorizes charm, but to me, it's really, I want to get to know the whole person because I'm a whole person. I'm not just a, you know, woman leader, but I would say, so friendliness and humor often can help debunk that she's just a bossy, you know, or worse. But it's, you know, sometimes you just like, okay, well, I'm here and you're not. So, you know, it's not like that's not what I lead with, but, you know, for sure, you know, but sometimes you're like, well, I'm not going to change this person's mind. They've clearly made up their mind about me, even if they've only met me for a couple of days. So, okay, well, I still want to achieve what I want our agency and our partners to achieve. So just because you think I'm whatever you think I am, doesn't mean I'm going to back off. Because I've built this network of allies over a very long career who know that I'm not that. So I'm not worried about, but again, I wouldn't lead with that. But that's, you know, you use all the tools in your toolbox. Everybody has a different toolbox. You know, mine, if you've ever done strength finders, I've done that, and that's been really helpful to make sure I'm relying on the tools that are gonna make me get the things done that I want to get done.
Can I just summarize that?
Yes, you can.
Be bossy.
I think that's fantastic.
Well, Kathy kind of stole my question. So, because you guys have had such great advice, and I know mentoring probably comes naturally to you, but sometimes do you find when you're mentoring, if you're also a parent, that you kind of treat sometimes mentees like parents, and how do you separate out making sure you stay professional, but also letting them know you're human too?
So I have the youngest children. I have a 21-year-old and a 16-year-old. It's at least for me, and I would certainly want Debra to say, because she has also been a parent, it's completely different at work. You know, your child, you're parenting your child. You're developing their values from, you know, screaming loaf of bread that they were when they were born. You know, you've been working with them for a long time, and you can shape their friendships. You can, to a certain extent. So it's different with even if it's a young, you know, sometimes these people come up and they're like, oh, they're my son's age. Oh my gosh, how did that happen? But you know, they have a different perspective, and they're coming to you as an adult. So maybe there's some nurturing aspect to that, but it's, you know, none of these people who've come up to me have ever, you know, there was a dinner, my husband and I were sitting around, and the two boys left when they were both home, and my husband turns to me and he's like, I think they think we're stupid and also idiots. I'm like, yeah, I think we are. No coworker will ever come to you that way.
So I'm going to pull Meredith in this.
Yes.
So I agree, don't parent, but definitely bring you in my family, right? That however we work together, that if you feel like your family, then you're going to take risks, right? Because if it's somebody in your family, you're like, I'm going to piss you off, but you're still going to love me. Right? I can still come back. I might stomp out the room, I might throw a tantrum, but we family. And so I think if that approach can also help like cross that parenting bridge. And we were talking about how even if you don't have kids, you have family. So weigh in on how you do the family and development stuff.
Well, I guess I have a funny reaction to that question, which is I don't imagine that partly because the young people I see are astounding, right? The educations they've received, the preparedness that they have. I just, you know, I look at some of the talent that we have within the organization, and like they're fully formed adults, you know, and so that honestly does not come up for me, other than sometimes boundaries are a little different. I had a funny incident this week. I won't go into it. But other than that, with people not necessarily taking into the full perspective, I just feel as though young people, they've had a lot of pressure on them. They've had to mature. They've been in these competitive environments. There's been so much pressure. And unfortunately, they're almost too mature in some ways. You know, they've had a lot asked of them. So I guess that's my response.
Thank you very much. Do we have another question? Wonderful. Two? One? Two, okay.
You first. I defer to you, sir.
Sure?
I'm positive.
Thanks. Hi, ladies. Thank you for the panel. This is great. I just had a quick question on kind of thinking about your parents and if there was an influence from your mom or dad that helped you in your life.
I got the mic, so I get to start. Yeah. So I had just amazing parents. And actually, I'm going to go back to the boss question. There's a woman named Janetta Coles. She used to be the president of Spelman, and then I think maybe University of Washington, really renowned African-American academic. And she told my mother, who she met through academic circles, that every now and then she would literally stand on the conference table and call people out. Wow. And do you know how hard that is for a black woman to do? Because we're, you know, the worst thing we can do is be an angry black woman. And she would do it in this way that was just kind of leaning into it, I think African-American women are brave. I'm just going to say it. Like, we are more comfortable calling out some things than a lot of other folks. And so, so when it comes to being bossy and owning, there's just a way, what we have to navigate to not be perceived as, you know, bossy, or just all of that. It's such a dance. And we all come to it in our own way and find a way to navigate it. But the reason I'm thinking of Janetta Coles in this context is Janetta Coles said that one of the hardest things to do in America is raise African-American kids. And my parents did. I have 3 sisters. There are 4 of us who grew up in a predominantly white town. My parents got chased out of town when they first moved in. They tried to rent a place, and all the neighbors objected, and they had to go move to the Shreve Swamp for a couple years. And so, first of all, they were courageous. They set a high standard of excellence because they thought that would make us safe in the world. And so, you know, we were expected to achieve. So that was modeled for us week in and week out. They were generous, community-minded. They gave. I often think, oh gosh, if my father could see me, he'd say, why aren't you giving more? Why aren't you, you know, taking care of folks? My dad, you know, he'd pick up the most bedraggled hitchhikers you would ever imagine. So they were just very generous and just really members of their community. So I could go on. I'll stop.
Does anybody want to?
Okay, so this might make you cry, okay. So my mother was Japanese and my father was black. And my mother's Japanese side was furious that she married a black man. And my father's black side was furious because now think about, you know, that he married Japanese, Pearl Harbor, all of that, right? So here are 2 people who do nothing but build a family and a life together on seeing the world differently. They just didn't buy into it. They just were like, you know, as corny as it is, it was like these 2 people who fell in love and said, we're just going to build this family, we're going to build this space. And so even for me, I can be in very tense, separate spaces and be okay. Right? So maybe that's why I'm gravitating towards hard things, right? Why do I do hard things? I lived in this family that was really, in many ways, very dysfunctional. But oh my goodness, there is such a certainty in me that I belong because my parents built the world that other people couldn't see, but that they belonged. And then we end up now, gosh, there's so many folks who are from blended families in all kinds of blended ways. But it, profound effect on just fundamentally who I am and how I navigate the world.
Okay, I'll give Cheree an opportunity to respond to that, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
Sure. So my parents were both teachers in the LA Unified School District. They grew up in neighboring farms in Bellflower, which is obviously no longer farmland. But what I learned from them is really kindness, that people of all stripes are hurting, and you need to take that into consideration, even with them being bossy or whatever. To always try to think about kindness first. And then I would also say, because they grew up in the Depression, they had a very different mindset than I think, the baby boomer generation did. And there was this sort of an overall fear of living because they saw how easily everything could be lost. Which in some way the opposite, I'm like, I don't want to have that fear in my life. I mean, obviously there are things I'm afraid of, but that fear of, I'm going to push forward even if I'm afraid. Because it was ruled their life. And it was, Depression people are different. It's just different, All right.
Well, thank you so much. I think that brings us to the end of our time. Maybe we can catch your question later.
That's fine.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful opportunity to listen and learn all these different perspectives. I'm sure everyone has enjoyed this as much as I have. I wish we did have more time, but we do have other sessions, so just thank you so much.
Should ask you that.